Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main tactical themes that played a key factor in Arsenal's 3-2 win against Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. So in today's video, first we'll focus on Arsenal's pressing, then we'll briefly look at Liverpool's fullbacks and the issues that they did have in transition, and lastly we'll focus on Arsenal's second half adjustments. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Liverpool in a 4-2-3-1 with Jota just in behind Darwin Nunez and Henderson and Thiago in that midfield double pivot, whereas Arsenal persisted with their 4-3-3 that at times can look like a 4-2-3-1, and the major call for Mikel Arteta was starting Tomiyasu at left back. The reason why Mikel Arteta did opt for Tomiyasu in that left back role is now you have two defensive-minded players dealing with Liverpool's main attacking threats out in the wider areas. We'll get to Tomiyasu's impact in tomorrow's video and look at how Liverpool looked to overcome that, but today we're going to focus on how Arsenal did contain this Liverpool side for majority of the game. First, we'll focus on their pressing, and what we ended up seeing was that they did look to ensure that Henderson and Thiago couldn't get on the ball. This was a cohesive effort from Arsenal, and they did a very good job of ensuring that Liverpool struggled to build out of the back. In terms of Arsenal's pressing, what we ended up seeing was that Gabriel Jesus was stepping towards Matip, Martinelli was dealing with Alexander-Arnold, and rather than having Odegaard and Xhaka pushing forward to Henderson and Thiago, they had Odegaard dealing with Henderson and Saka tucking in to close down Thiago. If the ball was shifted out towards Van Dijk, Saka would step forward towards him and try to block off the passing lane in towards Thiago, but Odegaard would also shift across to close down the Spaniard. That leaves Tsimikas free in that left back role, but you saw White pushing forward to close him down, and then Saliba would shift over to deal with Luis Diaz. Arsenal consistently left Henderson free in that midfield zone when Liverpool looked to build from the left, and you could ask why Xhaka or Thomas Partey didn't step forward to close him down, but really what you end up seeing here was that Xhaka was tracking the movement of Jota, who was often dropping off in towards that midfield area, and then you would see Thomas Partey dealing with Luis Diaz if he looked to drift centrally. There were occasions where Diaz would drop off in towards his own half to check in towards the ball, and that would allow Tsimikas to push forward, or you would see Darwin shift in to occupy his position out in the wider areas, but from there you would see Thomas Partey tracking his movement, and there was one example in particular where you ended up seeing Thiago running off Saka to push forward and towards the midfield zone, and this is where Thomas Partey was looking to sweep up danger. He tracked his movement and was able to close him down and win possession in that midfield area. In this example, you witness Tsimikas looking to play the ball across Saka for Luis Diaz dropping into the midfield zone, and Thomas Partey shifts laterally to close him down before he could play the ball back to Tsimikas. As Luis Diaz receives the ball, Thomas Partey gets within close proximity of him. He applies pressure to step into the challenge. He then brushes off the Colombian to look to push forward. They get into a bit of a physical battle, and it results in Arsenal recovering possession to push forward. Xhaka, on the other hand, was tracking the movement of Jota, and when Arsenal dropped off into two compact banks of four, that's where we often saw that threat being nullified. You would have Gabriel Jesus and Odegaard looking to step towards Thiago and Henderson, and from here, if Jota wasn't pushing high to occupy his center back, he was looking to drop off into pockets of space to receive possession, and at times you would see Xhaka dropping off in towards the back line to track his movement, but more often you were seeing him move in towards that midfield zone, and that's where Xhaka would track him, close him down, and look to win possession. Here you have Alexander-Arnold looking to split Xhaka and Martinelli for Jota dropping in between the lines. And when Jota receives the ball, that's when you see Xhaka immediately dropping back to apply pressure in that zone. He steps into Jota before he could run at Gabriel and Tomiyasu, and from there he's capable of recovering possession. And then if Liverpool looked to build from their right-hand side, Martinelli was closing down Alexander-Arnold, Odegaard was shifting across the deal with Henderson, and you would see Tomiyasu sticking tight towards Salah, while the two center backs dealt with Darwin, and Xhaka would track the movement of Jota unless he pushed higher to occupy Gabriel. We witnessed more of Liverpool's press from goal kicks, where they'd have Diaz and Darwin stepping towards the center backs and then Jota pushing forward to close down Thomas Partey. However, for the most part, Liverpool were dropping off into two banks of four, and they were looking to combat with Arsenal's 4-1-5 with Xhaka and Odegaard pushing higher up the pitch. So they had the two advanced players sitting in between Thomas Partey, and then Luis Diaz and Salah were dropping off deeper, so that that meant that Henderson and Thiago could deal with Odegaard and Xhaka. The only real issue that Liverpool had in that aspect was that there were times where Gabriel Jesus could drop off deeper towards that midfield zone, and he was capable of dragging out Matip or dragging away one of Henderson or Thiago towards him, brushing them off the ball and then looking to spread play out and towards the wider areas. But the biggest issue that Liverpool encountered was touched on in our preview for the game, and it was simply down to the space in behind the fullbacks and Liverpool's midfield being bypassed in transition. What ended up happening here was that Tsimikas was the fullback that was pushing forward, and Alexander-Arnold still occupied his natural positions. However, it was Tsimikas who was pushing forward down the left-hand side, leaving a huge gap of space for Van Dijk to cover because Thiago wasn't shifting across to protect that space. And whenever Arsenal did win possession, they were looking to slide the ball out towards Saka to break in towards that gap. On the opposite flank, you ended up seeing Martinelli also breaking forward. But what Arsenal were looking to do was that they were looking to overload Alexander-Arnold by getting Xhaka to make those forward runs in beyond him from an inverted position, and then having Martinelli breaking in beyond him on the outside. As also stated in the preview, when Alexander-Arnold does receive protection from his shuttlers or one of the double pivots or Salah, he's capable of coping in 1v1s, and he didn't really struggle here against Martinelli from that regard. But it was when Liverpool were caught out in transition that he was left in 1v1 situations with space for Martinelli to run into, and that's how Liverpool did struggle down that right-hand side. In this example, you witness Matip stepping forward to split Odegaard and Saka to find Thiago free in the halfway circle. However, Matip's pass is a bit short, and that enables Saka to come across to win possession. As we watch that play develop, Saka ends up looking to carry the ball between Thiago and Henderson to lead the transitional break, and he does that well. And when you look to the left-hand side, it's Martinelli breaking free and Jesus shifting towards Alexander-Arnold. Jesus may have ran offside here, but Alexander-Arnold was dragged narrow, and from there, Saka can now slide the ball out towards Martinelli, who's now looking to carry the ball into right half space, and Alexander-Arnold has to recover. The issue that Arsenal encounter here is that Martinelli slows down the play rather than driving towards Alisson. He allows Alexander-Arnold to recover his positioning, and he forces Martinelli towards the byline, and from this position, Alexander-Arnold's capable of forcing Martinelli to overhit his cross. And in the build-up to Arsenal's second goal, it stems from the Tsimikas free kick where you have Alexander-Arnold, Thiago, and Henderson staying behind the ball. You can see that Arsenal do clear their lines following a Van Dijk nod down, and they're instantly looking to play the ball around Thiago to ignite the break. As you continue to watch this play develop, you can see that Van Dijk and Thiago are bypassed, and it results in Martinelli now in a 3v3 being free to run at Henderson. Martinelli ends up carrying the ball in towards the final third, and what ends up happening here is that Henderson forces him towards the byline, and when it looks like Martinelli is going to get the better of him due to his pace, that's when Alexander-Arnold takes a gamble and looks to shift across to try and close him down to prevent him from getting to the byline. When Martinelli approaches the penalty area, you can see that Matip won't recover in time, and that Alexander-Arnold's taking a big gamble by leaving it 3v1 at the back post, but what he's doing is he's ensuring that Martinelli has to cut in towards his right foot, and it's down to Henderson to win the challenge. Henderson doesn't win the challenge, and now you can see that both Alexander-Arnold and Henderson are taken out of the game. Matip can't step towards him, and from there that results in 3 options that he can play the cross to at the back post. From there, while you can see that Matip can't step towards him, Martinelli ends up firing a low ball through the penalty area that Gabriel ends up dummying to bypass Tsimikas, and it places Saka in this position where he could tap the ball in from point blank range. Whereas Saka was breaking forward in towards that space behind Tsimikas. If we look to an example, here you see Alexander-Arnold looking to square the ball into the path of Henderson or Thiago, but he ends up playing a loose ball across the midfield zone. You can see that Odegaard ends up receiving it, and that can now spark an Arsenal break. What Odegaard does well here is that he drags Thiago towards him. However, he ends up dropping the ball off in towards Thomas Partey, and here you can now see the open lane that Saka has to run beyond Tsimikas into the space down that right channel. He ends up playing the ball in towards that zone, and that results in Saka now carrying the ball down the right channel with the left back looking to recover his position. The build-up to Arsenal's opener witnesses White sliding the ball across Tsimikas, caught out of position after Saliba retained possession, and that that results in Saka now carrying the ball down the right channel, and from here he's looking to square it into the path of Odegaard, making a forward run towards the final third. He ends up sliding the ball across the covering Van Dijk for Odegaard, and from there you can see that there's no protection for Alexander-Arnold caught in a central position, and you could see Odegaard and Xhaka busting forward to create that overload. As we watch that play develop, Odegaard ends up splitting both Matip and Alexander-Arnold, trying to compress that space, and it's Martinelli running onto the ball beyond Alexander-Arnold, placing him in a legitimate goal-scoring position in the center of the pitch to put Arsenal ahead. So in the opening half, Arsenal's press was ensuring that Liverpool struggled to build out of the back, and when they dropped off into two organized banks of four, they invited Liverpool higher up the pitch. Liverpool pushed at least 6 attacking players forward, and when they lost possession, it was a simple pass beyond Henderson and Thiago into the gaps of space to either attack Alexander-Arnold or exploit space in behind Tsimikas. In regards to the second half, we did see some minor alterations. Arsenal shifted their pressing to ensure that Odegaard wasn't shifting laterally between Henderson and Thiago when Saka was stepping towards Van Dijk. In this situation now, he was permanently closing down Van Dijk. They had White pushing towards Tsimikas, and now you had Jota on that left-hand side because Luis Diaz was replaced by Firmino due to injury. So what ended up happening here now was that you had Odegaard and Xhaka pushing forward to deal with Henderson and Thiago. They had Thomas Partey permanently tracking the movement of Firmino, and then Gabriel was dealing with Darwin. The other alteration that Klopp was forced to make at halftime was replacing Alexander-Arnold for Joe Gomez, but that didn't necessarily alter Arsenal's approach. Whenever they won possession, they were still trying to play in Martinelli in beyond Gomez, or simply play long balls over the top for Martinelli to break in behind Gomez, and he consistently did that in the second half. Here you witness late pressure on Gabriel, who looks to play a long ball over the top rather than playing it into Tomiyasu, and he attempts to get Martinelli in beyond Matip, who does a very good job of coming across, but he fails to control the ball and clear the lines, and it allows Martinelli to apply pressure, and then step in and brush Matip off the ball, where he's able to recover it and locate Odegaard, making a run in towards the final third beyond Henderson and Thiago. Martinelli ends up squaring the ball across Thiago into the path of Odegaard, and from this position when he receives the ball, he could either play it in towards Jesus or Saka or carry it forward, which he does, brushing across Tsimikas, but from this position he ends up firing a low tame effort at Alisson. Whereas when you look to the right hand side, now Arsenal were getting balls out towards Saka, and we even saw it in the latter stages of that opening half where White was beginning to make overlapping runs beyond Saka because they didn't have the threat of Luis Diaz down that side, and Jota was now forced to be pegged back, and he was struggling to cope with White making overlapping and at times underlapping runs beyond Tsimikas into advanced positions down the right channel or in right half space where he was looking to pose a major threat by playing pullbacks in towards his teammates. So as you can see, Arsenal were still attacking down the sides, and as that second half persisted, you start to see more of Xhaka making forward runs in that gap between Salah and Henderson. He was receiving the ball and combining with Martinelli or making forward runs to receive the ball in the left half space, and to no surprise in the build-up to Arsenal's winner, it's simply Liverpool failing to clear their lines, and Martinelli sliding the ball across Gomez into the path of Xhaka, and from that position he plays a ball in towards the penalty area that results in the penalty. So as you can see, this was an impressive win for Mikel Arteta's Arsenal, built on energetic pressing, organized and disciplined defending, and the Gunners targeting Liverpool's issues defending in transition once the midfield concedes possession, along with the space behind the fullback.